Welcome to Behind the Podium, Unveiling the Coach. Problem solvers have problems too. So here at Behind the Podium, I, Jared Cohen, and my co-host Alexander Ellis discuss the struggles, philosophies, demands, and practices of the coach, or said more broadly, health and wellness practitioner. To provide quality coaching is to enhance someone's life in an everlasting and unfolding way. This is not easy and requires a lot of due diligence and self-mastery on the part of the coach to be able to perform. So without further ado, join us as we dig deeper into the depths of the coach's mind. Welcome back, or welcome to Behind the Podium, Unveiling the Coach. I am Jared Cohen with my partner in crime,
Alexander Ellis.
And today we go behind the podium with a coach that identifies himself as a connector, communicator, and disruptor. Specifically, this guest of ours is the founder and head coach of Strength Education Training Systems, an education platform for coaches. Additionally, he started and facilitates Strong Mind Book Club, a book club where fitness business owners, coaches, personal trainers, and rehab specialists can have a monthly mind meld. Previously, our guest was an international managing editor of Breaking Muscle magazine. In fact, this guest of ours today is the author of the article 10 Types of Coaches and How to Spot Them, which for our longtime listeners might remember, this was the central talking point of our inaugural episode titled To Be a Motivator or a Technician. Without further ado, it is mine and Alex's pleasure to welcome Chet Morjaria to Behind the Podium.
Thank you so much for having me on, guys. Really appreciate it and excited for it. And by the way, fantastic research and expert pronunciation of the surname as well.
Yes.
Very impressive.
Yes, I will credit some of the research to that, hearing you on another podcast, and then
good point.
Taking some deliberate practice in repeating the name aloud for mouth muscle memory.
True professional, right here. True professional.
Well,
and he even got deliberate practice in. True sports psychologist.
Yes.
Oh, I know.
Just part of my vernacular now. I don't even realize it. So giving some background to the listeners, who is Chet? In more detail, it is a really fascinating and awesome story that I feel like is a great encapsulation and outcome of this whole thing that Alex and I have been trying to do from the beginning, and casting this wider net and connecting with people that are totally operating at that same frequency as us, and just really growing this tribe of coaches really interested in a much deeper conversation, and with a greater appreciation for the spectrum of what that title even means. So those of you that have listened to our first episode, To Be a Motivator or a Technician, we talk about this article that Chet wrote, 10 Types of Coaches and How to Spot Them. And in the episode, if you're like a super fan, you might be like, but you said it was by this guy, Tony Retrossi. And that is correct. At the time that I was refinding that article for us to talk about, I found it on Tony Retrossi's blog, and did not see the finer print that was actually credited to Chet. And then Chet actually was looking for some information on Kenny Kane and found our episode with Kenny, and was digging the podcast so much he went back and into the archives, found the first episode, reached out to articulate his love for our thing, and in doing so, very kindly corrected me which was awesome. I mean, such a cool story. I've had a lot of fun telling people offline, and I think this is a great pivotal sort of moment in our evolution and so far timeline of doing this show. So Chet, it's awesome, man, again, to have you here.
Thanks, Jared. Yeah, cool and funny story, right? And actually, I was doing that research because I was just about to meet Kenny for the first time. He had come over to the UK to do a seminar, and actually, I guess there's another cycle within this cycle because when I'd written this article and Becca was my managing editor at Breaking Muscle, I'd written this piece. I wasn't the one editing it at this time, and Becca had put in. So Becca originated, I believe, the CrossFit Kids program at CrossFit LA when it was Andy's,
wow.
and so like a million different cycles within this one cycle. But then Becca put up this picture of Kenny, and in our staff chat. I was like, who was that? And she explained that Kenny was the ultimate coach that's described in the article. Wow. So of course this got me interested to research, in her opinion, and this got me interested to research Kenny. And then so when I happened across your podcast, that was when I was like, right, okay, I've dug Kenny for a long time, but now I'm about to meet him. I just want to explore what he's up to some more and all that stuff. And then told this story to Kenny in London at that seminar too. So yeah, I've had some fun retelling it too.
That's so cool, and it's also like it goes deeper for me as well. Where Kenny had this podcast, The Positivity Project,
right,
which. I don't know if you can really find anymore. You got to go deep into the internets. I'm sure Alex could help you hack that. But it was some of the conversations, and I actually stumbled upon that podcast in my days of being obsessed with all things Kelly Starrett. And I was looking for more Kelly Starrett interviews, and then listening to that conversation that Kenny had on his podcast with Kelly, I was like, wow, this is such a deeper dialogue. And then he had one with Carl Paoli, where Carl was talking about some of the deeper psychological issues that he'd been facing over the time of writing his book. And that's when it really hit me. It was like, wow, I really relate to this. And I would like to hear more about this, because we always, I feel like the standard is you get people on and they talk from a very sort of what place of what they do, and and kind of the expertise that they have, and it I think sometimes leaves the listener, whether they're just a user or even a coach themselves, kind of feeling like, man, I don't know, like, am I doing something wrong? Because they sound like they have it really all figured out, and then it was like, okay, I think we all relate to this. We create the content that like we want, that sort of is cathartic for us. And so for me, it was like, I want to feel better about like not feeling so good all the time about like what I'm doing. And I want to know, like, are there other people out there that like care about this so much that like they're coming home after teaching a class where maybe the class actually thought it was great, but you're like, I don't know, like I'm not happy with that. So
yeah. And that's the cool thing about these podcasts, right? And from our discussions offline, that's a whole reason for doing this kind of stuff, in terms of like connecting up, having these emerging conversations and connecting up with people who are sharing the same sentiments and conversations.
Totally.
And I guess it's not a huge surprise that the same names are cropping up again and again. These people who like you said are devoting their lives professionally and otherwise to furthering this conversation. And Carl's another one as well. Like I haven't met him yet. I've studied a lot of his stuff, and we've connected on social media and just like online a couple of times, but a bunch of the strength education students went to one of his seminars live in the UK recently. I was coaching that weekend, so I couldn't attend. But every single one of them, I think there was 4 of them that went on, and every single one of them messaged me separately to talk about the connection between his work and my work, and like, the shared conversations and stuff like that. And that wasn't something that they, they'd said they'd do or planned. It was just each of them had that thought, I guess, independently, and perhaps discussed it on the day and then did that. And that made my day. It was cool. It was, some interesting conversations from there.
Yeah, and when Jared and I have done our recap episodes, to like sit back and reflect, the people who are, coaching at these higher levels, emerging, conversations we're having is like, why do I do this? And how does that influence, what actually happens? And that's not where everybody's at. And so it's almost like we had to go online this podcast format to be able to find those people on the regular, because I would never run into them, like walking down the street.
Yeah. I'm going to, I hope you don't mind this. I'm going to flip this on its head a little bit and ask you a quick question before you get stuck into asking me questions.
Of course.
So if you guys have the experience of talking to all these different people, having this conversation, I call it the coaching the human conversation. That's kind of how I, phrase it a lot of the time when I'm discussing these emerging conversations. So what have you found are like the big rocks, the common threads between the people who are having this conversation really passionately and powerfully?
I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is Simon Sinek, who, it starts with why, because I had done some work with Elizabeth Whip, and actually Jared has worked with her as well, and she was one of our early guests, I think on like the 6th episode, and every like top performer we've spoken to in some way, maybe not directly to Simon Sinek, but definitely has talked about, why they do what they do. Not about, like the mechanics of coaching, like that's whatever, but that this is the reason they get out of bed each day, is to serve a purpose that is more than just teaching a good lift or something like that.
Right, and you guys talk about that in your sort of podcast, in the information about the podcast, right? Serving a greater meaning and a greater purpose than just the mechanics and the movement.
Cool. Yeah, I think the other is that all the guests, like it's this other extension of it, like where without even having any consciousness of it or like forcing it in any way, there's been this like echoing of similar references and sources beyond even Simon Sinek.
Awesome.
And just fascinating that they're kind of the sort of zeitgeist, the information that people are consuming and even searching, like is sort of reverberating in the right ways for the right people, and then even beyond that, where like having people refer to other guests that we've had on, them not even knowing we had them on, and so seeing again this really pleasantly surprising organic way in which we've seen the connections between the communities, and then also the different connections among people that are in different disciplines, because that's something we've really tried to make a point and we want to pursue further. So having someone on that's a music teacher, having a naturopathic doctor on, people that have wrote books, who else is kind of left field? Well, even just yoga teachers, that is more underrepresented at times. But one of our episodes that will soon be out is this yoga teacher in Boston, Laura Ahrens, and she was just incredible. I mean, like her sort of passion behind her why was like so strong, and it was just really inspiring to hear her talk about the struggle of really trying to live in congruence with that, and also the way she's continued to just kind of like draw very firm lines in the sand about like where she wants to stand and where she doesn't.
It's brilliant.
She wrote this article all about like practicing what you preach, and like living your practice, and it was just like some great metaphors and quotes in there. And then similar to yourself, she in some frustration of not feeling like there was a yoga teacher training program that was as comprehensive, created her own. And it was just cool also to hear her kind of say, when I asked her, who are some of your role models, or who do you feel like are people that are living the path that you see as the ideal? Her answer was like, look, there's definitely people I look up to, but I don't necessarily feel like there is someone that is necessarily kind of embodying everything that I am trying to hold myself to and create a standard for. And that kind of like really cool, I think the sort of heart of the hero's journey of, it's like, at a certain point, like you have to be like, you are your own coach, and then like you have to sort of create that own path. So I was really, really cool, deep discussion that actually has a lot of content that is, that, maybe is not as familiar to me or others that aren't part of the deeper yoga world, the asana talk, but yet the overall context themes were just like super transcendent.
That's funny as well, because I always, on podcasts, I always struggle with the mentors and their connection to you question. And when someone asks me that, and I feel bad for struggling with it as well, because I so strongly believe in the power of having coaches and having mentors, and at the same time find it hard to just like you said, find it hard to explain the effect that my coaches and mentors have on me, because a lot of the time it's so deeply embedded in the why and the way I think, and the questions that they get me to ask myself, and not and not the what's, that it's sometimes hard, as we know, when we're comparing purpose and why with specifics and what's, to be able to articulate that in a short time frame.
Yeah, very hard. Well, going down that path, one of the things I like to try and do is have the guest tell more about themselves, their background, without posing the cliche question of like, tell us about yourself. It's
what
like,
do you do?
Yeah. It's like, oh my God, like how many times have they heard that? And so I've heard you articulate your why as empowering those that empower others. And I know one of the exercises with trying to distill a why is to essentially keep asking why, because you're trying to get to that highest context. So I'm curious from you, why is that your why? Where does that come from? What have been your experiences that have made you feel so strongly about the pursuit and the cause of helping to create better coaches?
Awesome question, and I'm glad you didn't ask the what question, because again, that I struggle with that question for the same reason. It's like, I do this stuff, but it's because of this, and this is what's important. My why, empowering those who empower others. I guess that's half of my why, and as you guys will know, as Simon Sinek fans, whys generally have like a contribution and an impact, and so empowering those who empower others is my contribution, and the impact of that generally falls into the realm of the depth of human connection for me. Like that's in a sentence, that's the other half of my why. So what I mean is empowering those who empower others to be able to live their lives, whether that's train, work, coach, live, eat, whatever, with greater purpose and insight. So like those helping people to develop that self-awareness, that self-purpose, and that insight into themselves, and then understand how to do that with others. That's where I'm coming from when I'm talking about empowering those who empower others. Because as we've alluded to a little as we've been talking so far, I believe that when you have that level, although there isn't really like a finite level of insight or purpose that you need, right? But like when you are going down that path and you're getting deeper and deeper down that path, and you're really starting to find out some some inner truths and inner drivers, that's when I feel the magic happens, and that's when I feel that that anything is possible within oneself. And then, you know, when you create that connection with others, or then just go deeper and deeper down that cycle, so helping others to create that, you know, that understanding within themselves, anything is possible, right? Like when we create deep human connections, coaching movement is really not that difficult.
Yeah, very true. It becomes much more emotionally relevant.
Yeah, right. And here's maybe like something to riff off, going off this insight idea. But like for me, this idea of insight and all its all its kind of tentacles, if you like, is really important to me, and also forms a belief of mine, or dictates a belief of mine about coaching in the industry, which is that I don't necessarily think it's experience which separates coaches in this industry. Like often we say, you know, this guy's got 10 years of experience, right. And when you have that what question at the beginning, even like I find it hard as well, you know, when someone says like, what do you do, I automatically start going into this kind of, well, I've been in the industry this long and been doing this.
You're like trying to establish that credibility.
But what does that even mean? Like for me, it's not experience that separates good coaches or coaches who are better or whatever. It's insight. And you know, what I mean by that is I've met and worked with coaches who have maybe been coaching for 1 or 2 years, but, you know, have put themselves in front of many coaches, are working hard to develop themselves, understand that helping others comes from understanding your own strengths and so on first. And therefore are like by the hour, by the day, just having this constant cycle of, this constant feedback loop, and really developing insight at like a rate of knots. And then we all know, you know, you have the kind of cliched, if you like, saying of a coach who's been in the industry 10 years, but has done the same year 10 times, you know, like they've just, they've been in the industry a long time, but they're just repeated. Like there's no self-development. There's, you know, especially at the depths at which we know that it's important as a coach and as a human to self-develop, and therefore it's just like a Groundhog Day.
Right.
Yeah.
That was one of our things we've talked about too, is this model that I came up with, like the 3X model, that experience is only one part of it. And then, you know, there has to be a willingness to experiment. And then there has to be this like example, like how well are you trying to practice what you preach and actually distill and help guide based on the sort of self-knowledge you've gained from the experimentation, and how that does or doesn't measure up with the various experience you've had. Like, are you willing to suggest that, like, yeah, for those 10 years that I was doing it, like, I wasn't doing a great job, and now like these most previous years have been very different, and you're leading by example in that way of speaking to the truth of your now current understanding of your experience.
Awesome. I love that. And I love the exploration and experimentation side of things too. I mean, that's pretty much what coaching is, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Although there are
guided exploration.
Yeah. But I was going to say, there are so many people who, it's just the experiencing, just like you're saying, like even in the yoga space, one of my teachers even said to me a few years ago, why do you keep taking all these trainings? Like, what more is there to learn? And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, we don't even know anything. There's so much more to learn, and different voices to hear it from too, even similar topics and concepts, but in somebody else's experience and their context could be like mind blowing.
Yeah, you know what? Like, one of the words that I will never ever say, if anyone hears me say this sentence, you can just shoot me on the spot, and that is that I am bored. Like, I will never ever say that, because I genuinely genuinely can't understand how anyone can be bored in this world. That's not an exaggeration. That's exactly how I feel. Like, you know, well, like you said, Alex, when there's so many inputs to be had. Like, this is going back in the day, but do you guys remember the Short Circuit films with Johnny Five?
No.
Yeah, like this is yeah. So there's a scene in the Short Circuit. Like, Johnny Five is like a robot who's kind of like a human, and there's he basically is thirsty for input, and you know, there's scenes where he's kind of scrolling through books and it's like, oh, I need input, and that's, you know, that's how I feel, and I can tell that's how you guys feel, and you know, that's exactly how can you be bored or stop learning? It's just like, to teach is to learn and to learn is to teach, right? So
and on the flip side of that, how do you handle managing the abundance of input, especially someone in your role that like is managing this business, you know, where you so much of your business requires on your own content, and like, you know, such a balance between you continuing to learn, but then also needing to kind of, I feel like sometimes the struggle is like having to put your blinders on for a certain period of time because and this is something I'm now struggling with as I think about like my kind of future of like, I need to be okay with like not learning more at this point in time about like biomechanics and movement if like I'm really trying to improve myself as like a sports psychology, mental skills coach, because there's so much more like I need to work on there and learn, and so like, how do you pick those more deliberate paths and stay committed in those ways?
Yeah, what a great question. So I think for me, part of my role is to be that curator of information. And, you know, part of my role as an educator of educator or coach of coaches is to help people figure out where to guide their attention on that side, and then to do some work within those realms. But yeah, so for me, there's a number of different things. We mentioned it earlier on in this podcast, and that is that when you look at the stuff that we need to know, you can trace it back to similar sources a lot of the time, right? True, yeah. Let's take Maslow as like the most obvious, like giant of giants type example. You know, like we have a ton of pyramids in strength education. Like I love circles and I love pyramids, and so we use the pyramid. Like I find the pyramid really useful. It's kind of hierarchical nature to explain so many different concepts. Right. And then I guess you can go back to the original pyramid, apart from the pyramids of Giza, which you know, which I kind of figure to be Maslow's hierarchy. And so we have, for example, our kind of central pyramid, which helps us to formulate thoughts around a lot of this coaching thing. And it starts with purpose on the bottom, and then you have principles as the next layer, then you have processes, and then you have performance. And you know, you compare that to Maslow's, and it's pretty damn similar. So yeah, to go back to your question, I think when we go back and start with the giants of giants, both in terms of concepts and in terms of coaches or originators of thought or whoever, you know, they don't have to be coaches. It could come from like the world of philosophy or psychology or whatever. Then I think that it starts to become easier to separate out what those big rocks are at the bottom and then build up from there, rather than taking this kind of reverse engineered approach of like, you know, saying, right, I'm doing this and this is important and I need this right now, so I'm gonna learn about this, you know, taking a more proactive approach to self-development and self-learning than perhaps the internet and just kind of, you know, finding things on the internet lends itself to.
Yeah, totally. And
I guess, sorry to interrupt, Jack, just one more little thought I had. Another piece, and I've actually been working on an online lesson for some of my guys on this today, so it's fresh in my mind, is developing systems around this stuff. And perhaps incongruous with most coach education, and perhaps where I differ and strength education differs on that side, is that like we we work in the realm of teaching people teaching coaches how to develop their own systems, and how to teach others how to develop their own systems, rather than teaching a system. So rather than teaching a proprietary system and saying, right, this is our system, and now you have to license it off us and pay us this amount of money, and now you can use our concepts and our pyramids and stuff like that. Like, I'm the worst businessman in terms of intellectual property in the world, because it's like right, okay, here's what a system is. Here's how to create systems. Here are the things like principles and boundaries that form systems. Here's what they all mean. Go and explore that. Here are some examples of these things, and here's how you might use them within your coaching practice. Because obviously you're going to get the guys who are like just coming into the industry that are like, what? Like, create my own system. I just want to teach people how to squat, So like, and then so there's a top down approach, I feel, and there's a bottom up approach, and and my aim is to so people that come in wanting to learn how to squat, well, I'm going to teach you how to teach people how to squat, but I'm going to do it with a view of like, okay, here's how to help those athletes create systems around this stuff, and here's the humanistic side to this stuff, and then just getting them to want what I feel that they need, basically, and then and then at some point turning the conversation on its head, and then really opening up those doors for exploration of this stuff.
Mm-hmm. But I think that curiosity and exploration is what sets apart a really excellent coach from someone who's just clocking in, clocking out. And, in my own experience, going through systems where they're like, okay, here's what you do, and here's how you do it, and this is the only way you can do it. When you are a coach and a teacher who is, trying to push the boundaries and continually trying to grow, that can feel really constraining. Mm-hmm. And so your model, you're already attracting, the type of person that you want, the type of person, that you're the reason why we're here chatting with you, It's like that. So I think, in my opinion, that's more I don't think fluid is the word, but it's more dynamic, like definitely. You're learning a way where you can be constantly changing and adapting and evolving to whatever comes your way, whatever client comes your way. Exactly. Because it's not a set of rules.
Right. And at the same time, there's nothing new.
Right.
I strongly believe there's, and this goes back to the giant of giants thing again. Like there's nothing new, and it's funny actually, because I was literally been thinking about this, as you do in the last sort of day or two, and I always, in terms of meeting someone where they're at, in terms of if we talk about meeting a coach where they're at, for example, in terms of their development, their knowledge, their coaching practice and everything like that, like we spend a lot of energy and effort and time on purpose, obviously, like exploring those ideas. For example, every coach who potentially is going to work with us, who wants to work with us, we spend almost the best part of an hour on a video call to like figure out this stuff, and it's just a genuine conversation about where they're at, and genuinely, can we help them or not, and if we can, let's continue to develop this conversation. But in terms of meeting someone where they're at as a coach educator, it makes absolutely no sense to me just to, and this is probably just another example of good coaching for me. It makes no sense to just spout information or provide knowledge or anything like that. Like these guys have some of that stuff. Maybe they need more of that stuff. But what's much more meaningful to me is to be able to help people assimilate and utilize that knowledge. And quite often we find that like just through almost reverse engineering how we helped our original students, we found that a lot of the time we were the skeleton on which they hung a bunch of other education. So, quite often with our mid-range coaches, if you like, we'll find that they've done a whole bunch of other courses and certifications and so on, and they're making some use of that. But the whole idea behind these kind of really exploring what it means to create a coaching system and a coaching philosophy and coaching values and everything like that enables them to utilize the tens of thousands they've spent elsewhere as well, which is really cool for me, because that's, that's ideal. And the flip side of that, or another side of that with our stuff, and what I would like people to get from their experiences with me and with strength education is to be able to take what we teach them and integrate that into what they do. Like, I don't want anyone to teach strength education, apart from maybe the tutors. They should probably teach strength education, but like, I don't, that the students, the coaching students, I want them to teach them, their own thing, and integrate this into what they do. That's the ultimate purpose for me with all the material that we're teaching.
And where does I'm still curious where this comes from for you? Like, what early experiences have you had that made you so convicted in the need for this type of education and this type of process?
Yeah. I think probably there's a few ways to answer that question, but probably one of the more succinct ways of putting it is that, coaching is, for me, 80% humanistic and the art of coaching, if you want to put it like that, and like 20% nuts and bolts and mechanics. And if we're looking at coach education, and this perhaps doesn't delve as deep as you want it to, but maybe it's a start. But if we're looking at coach education, for me, most coach education, apart from this emerging conversation that we've just been discussing early on, is 80% nuts and bolts, right, and like 20% sports psych and art of coaching, and all the humanistic side of things. And that just makes no sense to me. Right. So it's the discussion we were having before about like forging your own path. It's partially this stuff comes out of like, I didn't see this happening, and like I needed to change that. So not to say that, like, or at least have a small part in it, or try to, and work in that direction.
And do you remember particular moments that were big ahas in that way, or like were there certain frustration points where you're like, I don't feel like people are having the right conversations, or they're asking. I know you're big on like asking the right questions, right? And so like, do you have any memories of times where you were particularly aware of like a plethora of wrong questions being asked?
Oh, what a good question. I think as strength education organically evolved, I'm a systems guy. My background academically and otherwise is that I have like a master's in management from the University of St Andrews. I have the best part of a psychology degree. That's another story. We probably shouldn't go down that road for now. And, no, it's cool. It's cool. Yeah. Just an almost completed psychology degree, and but some good insight at least into it at a degree level. And over the years have worked with a bunch of different teams in many different guises, ranging from coaching teams, sales teams, editorial teams, welfare teams, offshore teams, onshore teams, you name it. And through those experiences, coupled my academic background with practical experience about what makes humans tick, what makes humans connect, and what makes people tick. And so I guess even when I was, back in, I don't do as much coach to athlete coaching anymore personally, purely because my head and my heart is in the coach to coach coaching. However, I still do some because I feel it's important to remain grounded, in the ultimate objective, or the end user, if you want to put it in system terms. And so when strength education was developing, it didn't always start off as a coach to coach education organization, if you like, but by the nature of how I was teaching, through this way that we were just discussing, even when we weren't specifically teaching coaches how to create their own systems, everything that I was coaching was still coached in terms of philosophy and systems, and asking athletes and coaches or whoever rocked up to the education to ask better questions of themselves. So I can't really think of moments which were frustrations, but I can think of moments where I had, I guess, through a combination of like my heart and my head, started walking down a road which was meaningful to me and meaningful to others, and then coaches starting to express to me that, hey, this is something that no one else is really talking about. And like, I don't really think in terms of competition when it comes to coach education, as in, like the conversations we've been having. I think that space for everything and everyone. People were comparing what I was doing to other courses and coach education they've been on, and saying, well, this was different or better or whatever because of these conversations and because of the style of coaching. And then that led me to go down these roads even more. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm curious also about the manager side of things, because one of my realizations is that most people in the fitness business are not that business adept, and I think that causes a lot of problems at a foundational level for trying to deliver the quality that ultimately is the purpose, right? Like, there maybe even in lieu of like a why, there's I would like to hope that those that get into it, there's some sort of emotional thing that they feel really strongly about and they're trying to bring to the world. But the how is completely in disarray, and there isn't a lot of organization or self-awareness around how to allocate or delegate to repair that. And what has been kind of your insights, and is that a similar thing in the UK? I don't know.
Definitely. And actually it's interesting. Like I've recently started to do some mentorship work with those entering the coach education space, in terms of like, so I'm not, even though I have a background in business and in management, and I have a management master's, and I worked in corporate and various different corporate guises for a long time, I still wouldn't call myself a business guy, and I still wouldn't say that business is one of my strengths. But what I am getting more adept at is the understanding of this idea of developing coach education, coaching systems, and so like I phrase it as coach systems development, and working around that idea of how to develop coaching teams, how to develop that's a unique or super kind of emergent conversation as far as I'm concerned, in terms of, okay, so you have you have these coaches who are I'll come back to the original question in a second, I promise, but you have these coaches who are working through their own pathways as they should be, yet you have an organization, a gym or whatever, that requires these coaches to work together and to have these so how do we start to align things like purpose and values, and how do we create that whole sort of mix, that whole web of allowing people to develop their unique skills, but then serve a common purpose and a common mission that is meaningful to the business and meaningful to the coach themselves and meaningful to the members or clients or athletes. And I think that probably starts to answer the question in terms of, creating that, those shared, understanding how to get to those shared purposes, and then creating how is based around that. Funnily enough, it all comes back to purpose, right? Like it's no surprise. And also, I guess, appreciating the appreciating, and we've spoken about this in a roundabout way a few times, but appreciating the subjective nature of everyone's learning experience. You know, like that's not to say that creating like you know, every single form of learning imaginable in terms of like, you know, for every piece of content, creating audio and video and written and everything like that, but just appreciating that people are going to come into it at different points, giving them as many markers as possible to be able to identify where they are connecting with this content, and then so everything that we do takes account of that. So for example, you know, we will have a piece of content which by its definition is a thing. It's like, you know, an objective piece, and then how people connect with that is subjective. And so what we then do is explore, give them some learning objectives to say, okay, here is the purpose of this piece, and here is where we're going with it, and then facilitate discussion as best we can, whether that is in person, which I strongly believe in still, and which is why we do most of our stuff in the UK. But we're beginning to explore creating those meaningful conversations online too, and having online discussions that are that continue that, and then help people to like bridge that kind of there on, you know, where they're at with like where we're heading to. So I guess that those things together hopefully go some way into to answering that.
Interesting. It's definitely a lot of team dynamic stuff, right? Like you can't just I think the mistake is that a lot of these privately owned gyms is like, okay, we're just going to hire a bunch of talent or potential talent, and just, you know, okay, you teach this class, you teach that class, here's the programming, like, and
it's very disjointed, and people, you know, coaches are distant from those objectives, right?
Right. Yeah. And it's just, it's strange to me that like the owners of these gyms aren't thinking about like these things, you know, that in an interview they wouldn't want to know like, what is your coaching philosophy, or like what are your coaching values, how do you like to coach? It's still very at the what level, even in hiring, right? Like you got your level 1, you have your 200 hours in yoga, okay, great, like here you're in, teach this class, like, which is
totally. And you know what, like one of the aspects that we work on, I this isn't meant to be a plug, but I guess it kind of is, but like I wrote an ebook which is like the 15 pillars of a robust coach development program, and people expected it to be the pillars of a coach development program, as in like, you know, getting right into here's how you have coach development meetings, here is like what the content of these meetings should be. But we were starting with things like mission, purpose, values, the adverts for your you know, how to recruit, the recruitment process for your coaches, and like, you know, that goes with the advert thing. What you were saying reminded me of the advert thing. It's like, how are you actually, you know, what is your vernacular when you are putting an advert out on Facebook or whatever? Right. Because that's the start. That's going to be huge, like gigantic in terms of determining the type of people you get, not only because of the things that you're looking for, but because of the way you phrase the advert. Alex, is a bit like you were saying, how, you know, the content that we put out tends to attract people who are going to be who are going to connect with that style of thinking, and who are perhaps I don't want to say higher level thinkers, because that sounds too like egotistical, but you know, you know what I mean, who connect up with that, you know, who understand that there's not one way of doing things, and so on. And my advice to coaches who are like figuring this stuff out in a sentence or in a summary would be, I continually use analogies to relate coaching to training. And you know, because that's, as coaches who are potentially struggling to understand coaching and what it means to coach, Jared, as you said, they probably understand what it means to be an athlete. And, you know, then we probably go back to that article of like the 10 different types of coach, and coaches who are like athlete centric, as in that sorry, let me rephrase that. Coaches who are more athletes than coaches themselves, or coaches who are more coach than athlete, and who they identify with more. So, I think probably most coaches can identify in some respect with being an athlete, and most coaches know that to have any form of athletic progression, there needs to be consistency. And, for example, or there needs to be deliberate practice, for example, but don't then apply those concepts to coaching and coach development. So, for example, when we were talking about having these coaches who have all got these distinct, maybe people are good at Olympic weightlifting or kettlebells or powerlifting or CrossFit or whatever it might be, and you've got this team of coaches who are coming in doing these things. How does that relate to the consistency of member experience, and therefore the consistency of member results? And how do we create that consistency within the coaching team? And what if we think about practice? So we know we tell athletes to practice until we're blue in the face. However, we don't practice our coaching. When do we do deliberate practice of coaching?
Yeah.
So but just in a sentence, and hopefully allowing coaches to explore this in their own ways. Literally I would just relate back, if you have a struggle with understanding how to develop coaching and coaching teams and so on, just relate it back to your training and think what are the big rocks of training athletes? Well, and then just see if we can apply them to coaching as well, because often the big rocks of coaching and the big rocks of teaching are going to apply to both, and then we start to diverge, right?
Totally. I pulled up Ernest Shackleton. Is it Ernest Shackle? He was the expeditioner that sailed to the Antarctic many a times, and fascinating story. But in Start With Why, Simon Sinek quotes the advertisement that he put out, which is not about what's, but about why. And
I remember which one it is. Yeah.
And the advertisement is: notice men wanted for hazardous journey, small wages, bitter cold, long months of complete darkness, constant danger, safe return, doubtful, honor and recognition in case of success. So it's perfect. It's that's attracting your tribe, instead of being need experience being a sailor or on the water, or there was no what prereqs. It was all about do you have a similar
you do passion? This because of this. The hours are going to be long, the money's going to be rubbish.
Yeah.
But do you want a job?
And he got a lot of good people. They're yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, for business owners, we're afraid to put our flag down and say, this is what I stand for, and I want to be just for these people and serve these people, because then you're it's scarcity, oh, but what if there's not enough of them, and there's all these consumers or whatever out here, and I could sell to them. But I was talking to Jared before we went on, and it's I got some unsubscribes to my email list, and every time somebody leaves, I go, yes, I have, exactly. It makes room for somebody who actually wants to be there. And so the more we can just not only get clear about it, but be super specific with everything, the verbiage and the languaging, all of that, attracting your tribe is a good thing. And there's enough for everybody. So don't be afraid to get specific.
Yeah, totally agree.
Which is a great segue into this next topic here. You wrote this great blog article. I'm blanking on the name right now, but the essence of the article was eliminating the qualifier for me in coaching. So cool. Do another squat for me. Make sure you get your knees out a little bit more for me, okay?
How many times do we hear that? Coaches don't mean to say it, but it happens.
Yeah, so it's great. I mean, it's a great, very astute observation that is so true. Those little nuances, and I love the way you very succinctly sort of distilled what that might be a reflection of. So I'm curious, what other linguistic revisions do you suggest, or have you come upon? Because that's a great one. It's so simple, and it's like a little sort of verbal tick, right? Like, hey, get your thumb around the pull-up bar for me. Yeah, great, nice job.
Yeah, cool. You're trying to make me give away all my future blog posts, right?
I think it was titled something Part 1, or that was a different one. So
yeah. Like, well, here's Part 2, 3, and 4, and 7. So okay, so I guess like I get another similar one to for me is I want you to.
Yeah.
So like I want you to do this, and in fact, so I was. We had a deadlift module, so which is one of our early modules within the strength education programs on Sunday, and one of the coaches there was this wasn't necessarily like the focus of the module, but you know it's something that came about, and we always work on this stuff when it comes about. Is he was starting a number of his coaching instructions with something like, what I want you to do is I want you to. So like it was almost a double there, and right. I think I counted the words, and there was like 9 or 10, unnecessary words. And as a sports psychologist, you'll enjoy the concept of attentional focus and how saying more with less as coaches is a really genuinely scientifically important piece of coaching. So that's one of them for me, is that those fillers, anything like the for me and I want you to, not only for those reasons, but also for the fact that if we're trying to create empowered athletes, then asking them to do something for the coach's love and attention is behaviorist at its finest, right? As opposed to humanist. Right. So that's it's not. That the coaches and that's a big thing for me, is that coaches love and attention is reward that we don't necessarily think about as coaches. And if we're to create empowered athletes and therefore not want them to do something because of a reward, or the opposite in terms of punishments, then we should be separating our attention from that. So as in, this is going down another tangent, but I'll just mention it because it's so relevant, as in the concept of unconditional positive regard, right. Where, we have regard and love for every person, every athlete, every member, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we love everything that they do, and having that regard then enables us to be really frank and honest with our coaching feedback, as in like, hey man, I love you, but that was crap, So right. So we can do that stuff. In terms of other words, but is a massive one, but as in like the conjunction, not as in glutes. Right. But so for example, phrases that we might hear. Great pull on that last clean, but your elbows were slow on the catch, or nice position on that deadlift, but next time lift faster, right? So, you're saying this, you're giving someone a compliment, but then you messed it right up. And right. So even in that sentence, you have like that, but it's that word that you like, it just messes up that compliment. It messes up like the whole meaning of what you're trying to do. It's like a devil on your shoulder trying to destroy the coaching that you're trying to create. So like, how do you feel as an athlete if a coach gives you a compliment, even if it's super sincere, and then follows it up with a but?
Yeah. Right.
The compliment just like vanishes, right? The compliment becomes worthless, and all they're thinking of, or at least diluted, at very best diluted, and it's just the but that kind of remains, and it's this potentially negative thing. And often when we're giving these coaching cues, these coaching instructions which contain the word but, those two things are not the two things we're asking them to do, are not mutually exclusive. Right. For example, having a good pull and having fast elbows in a clean are not mutually exclusive, and perhaps one potentially one probably facilitates the other. And same with a deadlift, get set position, and then and then being able to pull fast or being able to lift fast from there. They are mutually, you can do them both at the same time. So why make them sound separate? Why use language that separates them in the athlete's brain? If we're talking about subconsciously piecing together complex movements, then separating out these ideas isn't going to be particularly effective, right? So potentially we could use something like, okay, great pull on that last clean. You got loads of time to get your elbows round. Now you've done the hard part. Take advantage of that pull by getting those elbows round faster. So there's no buts in there. It's just saying, like, you've done
just
that.
Adding to the story.
Okay, why not do this now?
Yeah.
So nice position on that deadlift. Let's do another rep. Keep that same start position and lift faster. Do the cool thing that you did again, and do something else cool too.
Very cool. Yeah.
So
it's so important.
Totally. Connecting up the language helps to connect up the movement, right? And get the athlete to figure out subconsciously or consciously how they can figure out this whole thing.
Awesome. All right. Well, in the interest of you having dinner at a reasonable hour and picking up your stepson from football,
and that cider,
we'll hit you up with some rapid fires. Not too many, so that we can keep you around for round 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s, and hit you with some different rapid fires in the future.
Cool.
First, in what ways are you hard on yourself as a coach?
That's a good question. All your questions have been good. This is quite frustrating. Could tell you're a question guy. It's hard for me to figure out ways that I'm hard on myself as a coach, because it's kind of all the ways, and that's not meant to be a palm off. What I mean by that is I am a very self-reflective coach, and so I tend to analyze every aspect, and that that can be a dark rabbit hole sometimes. So I guess that's my answer to that.
Okay.
But when you frame it as being self-reflective, it sounds so much more positive.
Self-reflective, right? That's our job as coaches, right? Just make it all sound good.
Yeah, I'm just very self-reflective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is your biggest coaching pet peeve?
Probably just going back to what we discussed. And you know what, like, with all due respect to you, which is always a great way to start a sentence, right? With all due respect to you, like, I feel like you're asking me these quick fire questions, and they're meant to be quick fire, and they're meant to be what questions almost. But I'm struggling to answer them as what questions.
It's less. You can go as long as you want. It's more for me to restrain from collaborating or.
Okay, cool. I got it.
So it's me that's rapid.
So for me.
Yeah.
For me, that's a good way of putting it. So for me, my biggest coaching peeve is coaching without purpose. And then therefore, if we take coaching without purpose as facilitating the athlete's purpose, because that's what we're trying to do as coaches, athlete-centered coaching, then coach-centered coaching, as which more commonly known as barking instructions or whatever side of that you want to look at, those would be my related pet peeves, or just related frustrations, I would say, more than pet peeves.
Describe an interesting or difficult challenge for you as a child.
Movement.
Okay.
I was that guy, that kid, like to get picked last at team sports at school. I've never been what you might determine as a gifted mover, or whatever you want to call it. So yeah, that's like movement and sport, and finding enjoyment within sports specifically was a challenge for me, and is a part of a story which we'll maybe explore one day, about how sustainability in anything, and especially in sport, and how enjoyment relates to that, and how play and practice relate to that. But yeah, that was a big challenge for me. I still get picked last.
Last two. Any topic, fitness, nutrition, psychology related, that has you most on the fence in your current practice?
You know what? Like that. Yeah, that is a really tough one. I probably have an opinion about most most coaching things. I'm struggling to think of something that has me on the fence for two opposite reasons, really. I think, firstly, because the answer to everything is it depends.
Yeah.
Right. So like the fact that like everything works for everyone at some point for some time, and it, you know, the relevance of that particular thing for that particular athlete at that particular point in time is a big part of coaching for me. So it's the it depends scenario, but also the fact that by having a relatively strong handle on my own coaching philosophy and what underpins my coaching philosophy, that and this is a big part of that whole information filtering that we talked about with coaches, that I'm relatively quickly able to say, hey, you know what, like I'm going to devote a ton of attention to this and not much attention to this.
Nice. All right. Lastly,
I just realized I've avoided all three of your last questions.
But you've done it very very ninja-like. You've taken me out without me even knowing you were there. Lastly, what does it mean to you to practice what you preach?
Okay. In terms of coaching, in terms of athleticism, like in what way?
Whatever you preach, like what does it mean to you, or when you are learning from someone else, what does it mean to you to feel that what someone else may be coaching is valid and authentic because they themselves are in a particular or in that same pursuit?
Okay. I think for me, living in line with your values, as in, you know, having understanding and having self-awareness around those values, and being able to articulate them in a way that that others can connect with, and also being like living true to them as well.
Awesome. Well, this was well overdue. So cool, man. Like it's so great to know that you have this like whole educational platform devoted to the kind of stuff that we're talking about.
Stuff.
Yeah.
For sure. Really enjoyed this conversation, and whether it's like online or offline, would love to chat to you guys further.
Definitely.
Oh yeah, I already made notes of future topics to chat with you about, so you'll definitely be back.
Plus, I want to hear about Jared's experiences at CrossFit LA too, and being on a fly on the wall at those coach development meetings.
Yeah. You have to come out in person, and we could record there in person.
Oh yeah, that would be cool.
Where can people find you and what you're up to on the internet, Chet?
Cool. So probably the quickest, easiest, and best thing to do is just go to strengstheducation.com, which is let's call it an emerging website, shall we? And but what you will find is a bunch of content on there, like the piece that Jared discussed just now about coaching language. So if that floats your boat and that kind of thing, head on there, check out some of the content, and if you want to find out more and potentially have some further discussions around that, just throw us your email address and we'll get you sorted there. Otherwise, if you just want to explore what we do and lurk on the internet and view things from a distance, then you could probably check out the Strength Education Facebook page and I guess the Instagram too. But yeah, connect with us. My email's chet@strengtheducation.com. You know, we can't really speak about human connection and then discuss just kind of being voyeuristic on the internet. So so like, just, you know, if you're interested in this stuff, if something from this podcast piqued your interest, then send me an email and let's talk about it.
Totally.
Yeah. Awesome. And I made notes on all the references of things that we mentioned, and they will live over at behindthepodiumpodcast.com. But seriously, thank you. I'm really excited for future conversations. And now I also feel like, ooh, if I go to the UK, I have someone to go hang out with.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, for sure. Anytime you guys are in the UK or any of the listeners too, just give us a shout. We'll sort something out.
Oh yeah, now you gave us your email. You're gonna get all these emails.
Looking forward to it, guys. Jen, like seriously, thank you so much for having me on. Really, really enjoyed this conversation and the troublesome questions.
Yeah. Anytime. Until next time.
Until next time. Thank you.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to Behind the Podium, Unveiling the Coach. If you have enjoyed what you listened to, head over to iTunes and leave us a review. More information on each episode and the podcast in general can be found at behindthepodiumpodcast.com. We'll catch you next time.